would like to say just a word about our organization, the Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy, then offer a few thoughts and suggestions on how rigorous evaluation concepts, evidence-based concepts, can be incorporated into legislation and policy to improve the lives of at-risk youth. I'm also going to give a short overview of recently enacted federal initiatives in this area. Our organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, foundation-supported organization. Our mission in one sentence is to increase government effectiveness through rigorous evidence about what works. We have a bipartisan board that includes Bob Solow, Nobel laureate in economics at MIT, David Ellwood, the dean of the Kennedy School at Harvard, and others. And I always mention that we have no affiliation with any programs or program models, so we serve as a neutral, independent source of guidance of expertise to Congress, the federal agencies, and others on evidence-based programs. Our work is funded independently by the MacArthur Foundation, W.T. Grant, and others. And our work has helped, with executive branch and congressional policymakers, has helped advance some concrete policy reforms, as noted in a recent independent assessment. As one illustrative example, we worked with the judiciary committees to include in the Second Chance Act of 2008 a 2% set-aside for rigorous, preferably randomized evaluations in order to help determine which reentry programs and strategies were effective. The central rationale for many of the evidence-based reforms that have been proposed and in several cases enacted into law are fairly straightforward. The problem is that in many areas of youth policy, the United States hasn't made a lot of progress for a long period of time. Our nation's official child and youth poverty rate, folks under 18, today is 20%. We've made no progress since the mid-1970s in reducing child poverty. Similarly, we've made very limited progress in raising reading, math, or science achievement at the K-12 level, according to the Department of Education's National Assessment of Educational Progress long-term trend, which is probably the most respected measure. Another example is upward mobility. But I don't want to overstate this, there are some areas like reducing violent crime where there has been progress. But in many key areas of how well at-risk youth are doing in our society, there just hasn't been a lot of improvement for many, many years. We believe that rigorous evidence holds a key to bringing rapid progress to youth policy. And the reason can be illustrated with 2 or 3 quick examples. In the late 1990s, the federal government launched the Department of Education's a big after-school program for at-risk youth called 21st Century Community Learning Centers. It provided after-school programs for disadvantaged youth that gave them academic assistance and recreational activities. The program was evaluated in a study that randomly assigned some children to the after-school programs and another set of children to a control group that did not participate in the after-school program. That random assignment method, as I'll talk about in a moment, is generally considered the strongest method, the gold standard for when it's implemented well, for determining whether a program works or not. 2 years later, the study found that the program had no effect on reading or math educational achievement, which was a key goal, and it actually had an adverse effect on several behavioral outcomes of the children, including a sizable increase in school suspensions. Possible reason for that is that grouping at-risk children together in this setting may lead them to model their delinquent behavior for each other, which I know is what happens when we group my 2 children together in a similar setting. Another example is of a program that well-intentioned, plausible, seems to backfire when rigorously evaluated, is scared straight. So part of what evidence-based policy can offer is a way to identify ideas that seem plausible, that experts think seem plausible, which may be backed by preliminary evidence, but which when evaluated in the field with a rigorous evaluation turn out not to work for reasons that hadn't been anticipated. And if you look across rigorous evaluations across a wide variety of fields, from education to medicine and so on, many, many ideas fall into this category. Thought to work, but don't work when actually tested in a real-world setting. The good news is that rigorous evaluations have also identified a few highly effective programs. Mark referred to a few of these. To give you one example is multidimensional treatment foster care, which is a program that provides severely delinquent teenagers with foster care in families that are trained in behavior management. And importantly, the program emphasizes preventing contact with their delinquent peer group. This program's been evaluated in 3 gold standard studies, well-conducted trials, and been found 2 years after the program's start to reduce arrest rates and days incarcerated by 40 to 60% compared to the control group. And for the girls in the program, it produced about a 40% reduction in teen pregnancies. So large effects replicated across 3 different well-designed rigorous studies. Another example, I'm not going to go into details on this, but I will mention that many of the reentry programs that have been rigorously evaluated have produced disappointing results. Very little sustained effect or no sustained effect on recidivism outcomes. One exception to that is this program. It's focused more on drugs. It was evaluated in a large, well-conducted randomized trial in California, Amity Prison, and was found to produce a sizable reduction, about a 10% reduction in the recidivism rate sustained over 5 years. So that's another example of what rigorous evidence can also offer, identifying things that work and can have a big impact on the lives of youth. So the central goal of many of the evidence-based initiatives that have been enacted into law recently, which I'll summarize in a moment, has been to incorporate 2 main concepts into federal law and policy. One is increased funding for rigorous evaluations, preferably randomized evaluations, in order to grow the number of proven effective programs. And the second is, in cases where those proven effective examples exist, to create strong incentives and assistance for program grantees at the state and local level to adopt those effective models and put them into widespread use. And we believe if you can do those 2 things, incorporate that in a meaningful way into federal social programs, you could have an enormous impact in improving government's effectiveness in improving people's lives. So we have worked with there are a number of federal evidence-based initiatives that are now advancing these concepts, which we have helped to inform or shape through our work with executive branch officials in Congress. One is a large evaluation initiative that OMB launched last year across different areas, including the Department of Justice. And the 4 down here are several programs that were recently enacted into law in different areas: teen pregnancy prevention, home visitation, that are aimed at expanding implementation of the models and programs that have been proven to work. So let me end with a thought about what types of research and evaluation may be needed to have a meaningful impact on youth outcomes. In our work with the federal agencies and others, we advocate many types of research and evaluation methods, including, for example, implementation studies that tell you, is a program operating as it's designed? You know, are people showing up for the program? Is the curriculum being taught, et cetera? We also advocate many small-scale and preliminary studies, randomized and non-randomized, to identify the most promising interventions that merit evaluation with the more rigorous and expensive methods. And we generally advise agencies and foundations and so on to sponsor large, definitive, randomized evaluations, the kinds I've talked about, of a program at scale only when that program has been found in preliminary studies to be well implemented and to be highly promising based on the earlier evidence. So we advocate many different types of methods, research and evaluation, but a central theme of our work, consistent with a recent National Academies recommendation, is that, to quote the Academies, evidence of effectiveness generally cannot be considered definitive unless ultimately confirmed in well-conducted randomized experiments, even if based on the next strongest designs. And just to give you a flavor here without going into detail, Many of the less rigorous studies that produce randomized and non-randomized, that produce the initial evidence that tells you where to invest your money in more rigorous studies, end up not being confirmed when the more definitive studies are carried out, which is why we always believe it's important to go that extra step and test before you, in the rigorous large-scale evaluation, before you can have real confidence that this thing will work if you replicate it. In medicine, for example, 50 to 80% of the interventions that are found promising in phase 2 studies, which are the smaller scale initial randomized studies usually, are found ineffective in the large definitive evaluations that NIH sponsors, for instance, and the same pattern's been found in social policy. Turns out, just one last note, is that the proposed criteria for one of those scale-up initiatives, HHS Home Visitation Program, that I mentioned, basically tracks the notion that well-designed randomized experiments provide the strongest evidence, and where they're not possible, a well-matched comparison group study is a good second-best alternative. And there you have it. There's my contact information.